This episode of the podcast was recorded on the 5th of June 2024 at home in Wicklow, and it is the concluding part of my series on masculinity. And in it, I try to sum up the larger thesis of the series and wrap up the larger thinking around masculinity as explored over the last, the previous 4 episodes. And I try to make clear my own concept of an idealized masculinity that is both personally and socially responsible. So trying to look at masculinity in terms of what men should do for themselves, while also putting men into the social context and looking at their responsibilities in terms of their connection to others. And I suppose one thing I didn't mention explicitly, maybe because I don't believe it in the way it's often presented, but the idea of maybe male strength, socially speaking, or male privilege, I didn't really explore that as an idea of, what's the responsibility of that, because I often find myself thinking more in the area of men who are less obviously privileged or less obviously strong in status or social position. But that's also because I often think about men in a more vulnerable context, because I have my own conviction around the internal struggle of being a man, and that's often that is often where my mind goes first, to that place. That's where many men are living, and therefore that is not an area of strength or privilege or status. That's an area of profound personal struggle. So that's on me. That's very much coloured by my own perspectives and my own experiences. But I think what you will get from this episode is, again, advocacy for thinking about men and masculinity with greater care and compassion. And you'll certainly get a clear sense of my own idea of what healthy masculinity could and should look like. So if that's of interest to you, I think you'll get something out of this episode. I hope you enjoy what you hear. I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my moji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for choosing this episode of this podcast. And there are so many others out there you could have chosen. So you really are very welcome. Thanks for giving me your time, your attention, your ears. Thanks for being willing to open up a channel between me and you. How are you? It's summer. It's summer, baby. So there were so many episodes earlier this year where every time I looked out the window it was just rain, and now I'm looking out and the sun is shining on the green grass, and it's just lovely. There is an abundance of growth everywhere I look, and it's very welcome. It's energizing. So that's nice. Last week I was feeling energized because I was feeling better, having been sick in the aftermath of saying goodbye to our old pet, our beloved pal Marlon the cat, after 22 long years of love and service and furballs. But here I am, another week down, and today I'm going to try and bring my series on masculinity to a conclusion. There will be some follow-up to this series, and as I said, I have flagged an interview I have provisionally booked with someone who I think is going to be really interesting to talk to about masculinity because of their particular perspective and experience. And that may come up again with other potential guests in the future. I've been pretty slack with the interview thing for lots of different reasons. It's often just logistical and technological, but there's a convenience and a natural fit for my routine to do the podcast the way I do it the vast majority of the time, which is basically me and the mic. It's a monologue. I was reflecting on the nature of the podcast yet again and thinking maybe really how I should describe this is, monologues from middle age, but it just has a particular connotation, doesn't it? There's something about that brings with it an instant indictment of something flaccid. So not very enticing. I'll steer away from that. So in any case, today, what I'm going to try and do is wrap things up and see if there have been areas that I've missed. And again, I suppose it sounds like a disclaimer, but I haven't tried to be comprehensive. I haven't tried to be the authority. I'm not. I'm not the authority on masculinity. It's an absurd claim. And I guess some academics might pitch themselves in that area. I'm not sure. But these are just my thoughts, my perceptions, my reflections, and all of it, as always, it's just an offer. It's just an offer. There's no obligation to care on your part. I'm not asking you to care, really. Although I have in the past made that, I have in the past explicitly asked you to care, and I do believe you should care about men in general. But if this particular topic, exploring masculinity, is not of interest to you, that's okay. That's not a crime. You're interested in what you're interested in, and you care about what you care about. It's hard to fake that. But usually, when we gain more knowledge about something, that often stimulates increased interest. And so by the time I finish this episode today, which will be the 5th part of the series, that's, cumulatively going to be over 6 hours of content, I suppose is the word I have to use reluctantly. But 6 hours of thought, and 6 hours of commentary, 6 hours of personal sharing, and six hours of the sharing of lived experience. And sometimes I'm talking in the abstract, but often it's based on my experiences and the experiences of others close to me. And I do feel like this is relevant at the moment, particularly relevant at the moment for reasons I tried to lay out in the first part of the series. I think there is a sense that men are, and it's very broad just to use that as the umbrella term, but let's leave it as it is. Many men are just feeling embattled and pushed out and pushed down. And I'm sure there are lots of other people or groups or people who identify as this, that, or the other who feel, hey, get in line, get to the back of the queue. You're not the only one. But I'm trying to, there's a certain good faith attitude to what I'm offering here, and a good faith attitude that I would ask from you to go, let's just look at this cleanly with the awareness or the acknowledgement that I've tried to keep this on track. I've tried to keep it on point. And that doesn't mean I'm not thinking or considering the situation of others. But that wasn't the focus. And in fact, I think that's a good place to start, because one of my thoughts today around this exploration of masculinity, I'm interested in the idea of the burden of responsibility. And I think we are living in a time where in the public discourse, and specifically, in relation to culture wars and identity politics, I think that there's a terrible expectation of representation. There's a terrible expectation that everyone who can be identified as being of a certain group, everyone who can be identified as, climbing out of or walking out of their particular silo, there's an expectation and a sort of a demand that they will be representative. And that, I believe, can be interpreted as a burden of expectation. So, you're a man, therefore you must represent these things, and you can be a spokesperson. Oh, you're black, therefore tell us about the black experience. Oh, you're a woman, what's the female experience? You're gay, what's the gay experience? You're trans, what's the trans experience? You're disabled, what's the disabled experience? And I just, and I've expressed this concern or criticism in the past, more than once. There's this terrible habit. I think I addressed this specifically last week. There's a terrible habit because of laziness and ease. There's a habit of monolithizing, of making one all, making one person the representative of the monolith, and just doing this kind of conflation of assumptions about the representative other. Which is, I just think, colossally unhelpful, unthoughtful, naive, disingenuous, and completely unreliable, and therefore doesn't actually contribute to deeper understanding. And I guess ultimately what I've been trying to do with this particular topic, and what I try to do with a lot of things I talk about on the pod, is encourage or explore or try and open avenues to deeper understanding and deeper thought, with a view to improving one's overall sense of wellness. Because with deeper understanding, deeper thought, I think there can be improved perspective, improved consideration, improved understanding, which I believe can lend itself to greater calmness and a greater sense of well-being, or a greater sense of, I can accommodate that conflict. I can accommodate that discord. And I think a lot of the time we get caught up in symptoms. We get caught up in being very reactive to symptomatic behavior, rather than going, well, where's this coming from? Because understanding, I don't think identifying symptoms is understanding. That's information gathering. It's data collection. It's not understanding. It's just going, this is what happens. But I think we need to be always asking ourselves, why? Where does this come from? What's at the heart of this? What's at the root, the base of this? What's driving this? And so to come back then to the idea of a burden of responsibility, I'll just put the question to you: what is your expectation of men? what do you think the male burden of responsibility is, and to whom should men be responsible? And is that a realistic expectation? Because I ask myself that. I kind of go, the idea that I would be positioning myself as someone to speak for all men, or to speak for the definitive male experience, is absurd to me. It's like, no, I can only speak about my own experience, and I don't presume to be representative of men. I presume to be representative of myself. And yet I think it's and this is my sort of feeling, or my conviction, that because humans are social animals, and because we interact with so many other people, because we're part of our communities and our societies, we end up being representative of other, in this case men, the same way as women will be positioned in that place as well. But there's an interconnectivity, there's an interaction that I think brings with it a responsibility to, and I suppose this is a social imperative, which is adjacent to a moral imperative. So the social imperative is, if we're going to live with each other, we have to agree to behave a certain way. This only works if we agree to step carefully around each other and move carefully together and move with consideration. And the moral imperative is, well, what does that consideration look like? What does that mean? And this comes back to just the fundamental idea of the social contract of, well, I agree not to kill you if you agree not to kill me. Now, that might be a gross oversimplification, but that is fundamentally it, isn't it? We agree to honour family units. We agree to honour the relationships of others. We agree to honour the idea of protecting our children and minding our old people, because those become social understandings and social bonds, and that seems to be as much as we can manage a lot of the time, which is why when you have one of the most widespread and obvious issues and hot potato issues around Europe at the moment and elsewhere in the world is the issue of immigration, migration, asylum seeking, refugee status, etc. When you put that into economies, countries, societies that already feel like they're barely keeping it together, it feels like a massive threat, a threat of disruption, something that's potentially destructive. And people don't, and this is a broad generalization, but it's like people just don't have the capacity or the time to go, hold on, is this really a genuine threat, or am I just having a very strong emotional reaction? Am I allowing myself to be steered and manipulated by certain rhetoric, certain sound bites, certain public figures, certain social media trends, certain news stories? Or am I stopping to catch myself and try and understand my own thinking? I kind of contextualize this. And again, I think contextualization is a very important part of understanding, because contextualization takes us beyond the symptoms. It takes us behind the symptoms or below the symptoms to go, where is this coming from? Why is my reaction like this? Why is my perception of those people or my perception of that issue like this? And so, on that note, and on this particular opening idea of the burden of responsibility, I think, the type of masculinity that I value is one that is very much tethered to a sense of personal responsibility, of personal interrogation, and of a respect and kind of valuing of social context. So a man who can go, okay, well, I'm not living alone. I'm not a monk or a recluse, living ascetically in the hills, in a cave, in a forest, on my own, in a distant cottage in the woods. If I am among society and if I am among others, I do have a responsibility to conduct myself in a certain way. And, I recognize in myself, I have a lot of, the monk, makeup in me. And I don't mean in a religious sense, but in the sense of, being quite happy to be detached and removed and to be living a disciplined, quiet, reflective, invisible life. There's a huge part of my makeup that is drawn to that and that sort of shuns society and is not particularly interested in society. So I have a tension in me that goes, that is aware of, that's probably my happiest place, to be away from people and away from others and not having to deal with that, that sort of static and white noise of human interaction, just the hubbub, the bustle of human life outside my own mind. And that's why, my wife has, on more than one occasion, accused me of living in a bubble. But that said, I am out there. I do put myself out there, and I get on with it. But sometimes that's an effort. Like that's a deep internal negotiation and a deep internal switching of modes to be outward facing. But when I am outward facing, and I have been, of course, when I worked as a teacher, anytime I've been working as a performer or a facilitator, a martial arts instructor, whatever it might be, I've always taken that, whatever the status and the visibility, I've always taken very seriously. And from a young age, early adulthood, and first time stepping into a classroom, I was very aware that I was a man stepping into those spaces, and very aware of what was coming out of my mouth. So what am I saying? And more importantly, how am I behaving? Because certainly my conviction is how you treat others, how you behave towards others, is often far more resonant and impactful than what you say. And, I've done an awful lot of saying in various capacities until I finally found the perfect format here. A podcast. What's that? Oh, you can just speak. You just speak into a microphone and put it out into the world. And you can just speak for as long as you like. And you don't have to talk to anybody else. You can just listen to your own voice. And I'm like, sold. Excuse me, sorry. But I'm asking myself, where did that sensitivity or consideration in me come from? in terms of being aware of being a man, being aware, okay, I'm a masculine presence. What am I representing here? And again, I come back to, well, I'm representing myself. But maybe part of my personal evolution or my own thinking around masculinity was definitely reactive, and reactive to a lot of critical attitudes of men that I encountered, throughout my life. Whether it was my mother speaking through a sort of a feminist lens and being critical of certain male friends of the family and certain behavior or relationship breakups or whatever it might be, nothing out of the ordinary. My mother was certainly very vocal, and I felt quite righteous, but very critical, and then that could curdle at different times in different contexts into something that was a bit less balanced, maybe a bit less righteous and just purely emotional, critical, scathing, dismissive of men in general. And I grew up, I didn't take that as gospel. I was, looking at that critically, trying to go, what is this? But of course, I was one of 4 future men that my mother and father were raising. And I was aware of certain frames, certain perspectives. And, what I would think of now as a sort of a form of sexism that, women would be very comfortable, vocalizing and putting out there, which was just, most often the kind of the double whammy of infantilizing men, viewing them, in infantilizing terms, and also reducing men to not an awful lot more than their sexual impulses and sexual drives, and they're reducing men to sexual objectifiers. And I found myself, I found, okay, I see that, I'm aware of that, I see that around me in the world, but I always felt that those two things, like men fundamentally never grow up, and men fundamentally never escape their sex drive. And of course, I am speaking about straight men here. That was my, the men who I was exposed to. It was, there was no one openly gay in my life. There was one friend of my parents who was gay and very out and, extrovert and confident, and very to me as a young guy, a very attractive personality, like just a fun adult to be around, quick to laugh, a lot of energy, and just a warm, fun person. So that was one of my first in the flesh exposures to homosexuality, and I thought, yeah, all good. Just that particular person, just a very nice person, great. But yeah, mostly I would have been exposed to being around straight contemporaries of my father and mother, and among my own peer group as well. And as I became a young adult and was exposed to that sort of, again, that kind of reductive thinking around this is what men are like. And, I recognise now, that was young women saying that, and I presume, or I'd hope, that their view of men has become a bit more nuanced. But I did chafe against it. And I just thought, no, I don't accept this. I don't accept this reduction. And I didn't feel I had to kind of go to war or, hold up a placard or anything like that. But I just thought, well, I'm clear about how I'm conducting myself. in my interactions with others and with women. And I've spoken about this before, in the context of the Aisling Murphy murder, a couple of years ago here, the young teacher who was attacked and killed while she was out jogging, and there was a huge and I think very justified outcry of despair and anger and grief and concern, and it became highly centered around the idea of men and male violence and male transgression, and that iteration of kind of deviant masculinity, particularly in relation to women. And I did a long episode trying to look at that and look at my experience of how I'd behaved as a man growing up and my attitudes to women, and those the attitudes of my male contemporaries. And I just pushed back a little bit against the sort of, all men are doing, all men have this kind of fundamental capacity and fundamental flaw. And I was like, well, look, no, I disagree fundamentally, and I still do. And this isn't a kind of a not me argument. It's like not a lot of men argument. And I did make an argument for like, okay, immaturity and sexism is not misogyny. And, objectification is not sexual assault, for example, because my argument would be, well, women objectify men. Women can be sexist towards men. And I don't then make the assumption that that's the only way women can view men. And I know I'm falling into a binary presentation of gender issues here, but again, I'm talking largely about my own experience. But what it meant for me, I suppose, when I was thinking about my own masculinity was, well, there is a way that I'm going to conduct myself that will remain, in whatever context I find myself in. I'll be pretty unambiguous in how I present myself as a man. And I've tried and still try to have that as something that's, whatever. I mean, I'm not offering up, hey, you need to understand me, that I'm thinking about this. I just kind of go about my business, and I try to be thoughtful. I try to demonstrate a capacity for listening, for consideration of others. And I am certainly aware of perceptions and how men can be perceived, and how assumptions about masculinity can be projected onto me as easily as they can be projected onto any other man. And I try not to be too reactive in that situation, because I don't think that helps. I mean, I think we're living in a time of extreme reactivity and a time of not enough thought and not enough consideration. And this isn't a soapbox I try to stand on. I know you can go, well, hold on, this is your 5th episode on masculinity. If that's not a soapbox, what is? Again, contextualize it. But I probably still haven't answered the question of responsibility. I don't think there is. I don't think I have a burden of responsibility in any larger sense. I have a burden of responsibility on a personal level, and certainly in my role as husband and father, especially in those two roles, I have, proper, due, appropriate responsibilities that I respect and value and understand. And after that, it's kind of on a person to person basis. I can go, well, there's certain responsibilities as a son, and then maybe as a brother, as a friend, a family member to others. But I don't know. I mean, basically what I come back to is, look at your own behavior. And as a man, if you're in a position to have a positive influence, and that's a subjective term, but if you're in a position to have a positive influence via a conversation with another man who is, who is what? I don't know, who is not conducting himself in a way that seems to be conducive to sitting in with the social contract I mentioned earlier. I mean, I'm not seeking out those conversations, and that's a selfish and a self-preserving instinct. But if that happens organically, I'm totally happy to have that conversation. And my larger sense would be that a lot of men are having those conversations, with their friends, with their brothers, with the people close to them. I mean, I feel confident that is happening. But again, part of the rhetoric out there, in a couple of episodes, I spoke about the one of the most destructive bits of rhetoric around men is that boys don't cry, and one of the other ones is men don't talk. I've spoken about this before as well. I'm not sure how true that is, in my experience anyway. But look, I'm gonna kind of move to the idea of what my kind of ideal version of masculinity is, and just to put it out there to see how does that stack up? What does that look like? When you conceive your own idea of a type of masculinity or manhood that you go, yeah, that's one. That's one I approve of. And, that's a word I'm going to come back to: approve and approval. But fundamentally, I come back to this version of masculinity that I value, which is one of a man who is taking responsibility for his own actions, a man who is capable of forming his own opinions, a man who doesn't feel the need to weaponize his opinions and use them as in an antagonistic way against others. A man who looks after himself physically and emotionally. A man who doesn't seek respect, but gets it. A man who stands up as a father, if he is one, who stands up as a partner or a husband, if he is one, and who doesn't, and this comes back to the personal responsibility idea, who doesn't take out his stuff on others, who doesn't take out his trauma and his damage on others. A man who finds healthy ways to come to terms with himself and finds healthy ways to manage whatever it might be, emotional distress, psychological distress. A man who is unafraid to ask for help. What am I missing there? I don't know. So I think that type of masculinity I'm describing, there's maybe a certain stoicism involved there. There's definitely discipline, self-discipline involved there. There's thinking. There's feeling. Another thing I would add is a man who can be comfortable around women and comfortable around children and not be threatened by whatever the implications are of being in the company of women or being in the company of children, to be able to make that space for others, to understand one's role. Again, a loaded term, like who prescribes the roles. This is part of this whole discussion is what's been allocated, what role has been given out to you. But part of sort of deconstructing roles is individual critical thinking, and being unafraid to redefine a role for oneself. And this is, again, I think a lot of these things, these are not exclusively possible for men only. Anyone can try and access these things. Like, it depends on what you value. But a man who can be equally comfortable with traditionally feminine qualities as well as traditionally masculine qualities. So if we have, strength, stoicism, endurance, physical strength, emotional reserve, that's all fine. Because, again, there's a context for those things where that's, they are very desirable qualities. But there's a context when it's very desirable in a man for a man to be nurturing and to be caring and to be vulnerable and to be open. And a man who can accommodate that and go, yeah, that's grand. That's very much a part of who I am as well. I think that's a desirable iteration of masculinity as well. And again, there might be an aspect of this where, a man who is unafraid to challenge other men. But see, my brain instantly goes like, a man who's unafraid to challenge, to challenge anyone in a way. And this is not like a physical challenge. This is not calling someone out. This is not putting oneself into a confrontation or a conflict situation. But to have the confidence to go, I disagree, or I don't think what you're doing there is cool. And so I think that there's a balanced and considered calmness and thoughtfulness to this concept of masculinity that I'm trying to lay out here. So I don't know. I mean, like, if you think, again, return to the idea of responsibility. Like, whose responsibility is it to advocate for improved behavior? And who gets to say what improved behavior looks like? And then this puts me back in touch with the idea of approval. Whose approval are we seeking? Whose approval do we need? And see, approval might be a misnomer. It might be a bit of a misdirect. Because I would, from a sort of personal psychology point of view, I'd go, well, you need your own approval. And that approval, to me, has to be connected to thorough, rigorous self-interrogation, self-examination, and be highly constructively critical, to go, look at that area of how I am. That's really not good. I'm not serving myself. So then there's an idea of humility that comes into this idealized version of masculinity. The idea of service. So that is a particular mindset. It's a particular reference point. Humility involves being willing to look at oneself and go, that's not good. That's not working. I can do better. And it's not anyone else's responsibility. Whether or not you think it's someone else's fault is largely irrelevant, because it's in you now, so you have to deal with it. And the idea of service as well comes into relationships. Am I here to... There's definitely an aspect of service, I think, in healthy relationships. It's not one way, it's not one thing, but it's a part of, I'll serve my wife, I'll serve my daughter in what ways I can, in what ways feel, best for the family. And I'm not afraid to then take, to be proud of that, to be proud of my humility, if that's a contradiction in terms, but I'm not afraid to value my humility. I'm not afraid to value putting others before myself. Oh, the cat's at the window. This is Ruby, the survivor. Ruby, you're not coming in. Excuse me, sorry. And again, approval, it's not about approval. It's about, again, putting yourself in a position where you recognize other people are here too. Other people are trying to live their lives as well. And I can be critical. I can be critical of others. I can be critical of some of those sexist attitudes towards men that I described, before. But I don't think focusing my energy there is particularly useful to myself. I'm like, well, okay, what can I do? I'll take on every woman and challenge them and go, this is what you really think, isn't it? It's like, it's not like there's not a grain of truth in what they're saying, any more than there's a grain of truth in some of the sexist things that men come out with about women. These are human dynamics. And, I did speak about this last week, the shorthand that we use for the sake of convenience, ease, speed, social lubricant, whatever you want to call it. And it's threat analysis, threat assessment, and moving on. Like ultimately, we're incredibly mobile animals, humans. Like we're always moving on. We're moving through time at speed, moving to the next interaction, moving to the next task, the next thing to be done. And we're operating on many different levels, throughout. And part of that ongoing movement is this, incessant analysis and assessment of those around us. Energy, mood, threat, physicality, attraction, fear, anger, uncertainty, whatever it might be, love, care, all of these things come across our screens internally, in microseconds. And we move on. So we have to have a shorthand. It's not like we can't take ferocious amounts of time for every human interaction and go deep, because that would be exhausting and absurd and ridiculous. And the world would grind to a halt. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing. And again, this will push me into political, Marxist, socialist, anti-capitalist analysis. The profit motive and just trying to survive. And when are our happiest times? When we're frantically scrambling around, to make the mortgage payment, to make the rent, to pay for this, to pay for that, or when we feel we can take our foot off the pedal and relax and enjoy a human interaction with somebody else. I mean, that's one area of enjoyment. There are others as well, of course, but yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to feel where the natural end point of this is. I think I can't remember if I mentioned listening to some other podcasts on masculinity and coming across the idea of alignment. And simply put, a female expert on relationships and sex and desire was asked by the male host about what women find attractive in men. And this idea of alignment was put out there. So a man who is aligned. And my first thought was, are we talking about posture? But no, it's an alignment with one's convictions, an alignment with one's beliefs, one's principles, and the pursuit or arrangement and coordination of life in a way that it adheres to those principles and convictions, and an implication of forward momentum, I suppose, and fulfillment and fulfilled living with clarity. That type of alignment, and I found that a very resonant idea. So, like a man of conviction and of convictions, who then lives his life based around those things. To a certain extent, to a large extent, that's how I'm trying to live my life, and have tried to live my life. There are areas that are empty. There are areas that are unfulfilled and are definitely no one's responsibility but my own. And that's a work in progress. And that's another area of masculinity that I value, where there's a real willingness to own imperfection and own incompleteness and to accept uncertainty. And I don't care what age you are. You know, the world is, certainly the world we live in now, the modern world, we're obsessed with certitude. We're obsessed with categorization. We're obsessed with simple, easy to understand ideas. We're obsessed with reducing things to a snapshot that we can just swipe off our screen the second we've seen it and move on to the next thing. We don't like grey areas. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like nuance and open-ended questions. We want the quick hit, and we don't want to be forced to think. It's just feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. Let me consume. Again, come back to the capitalist critique. Consumption is king. And if we want to consume, we've got to get out there and make money. You know, depending on your interpretation of consumption. But I don't value that. You know, within reason. I mean, I recognize there's a baseline that is necessary for survival, but it's not good for us. Out of balance, it's not good for us. Again, I come back to my fundamental position with a lot of things, which is moderation, which is the middle ground, which is balance, consideration, and not going too far in any one direction. So, yeah. Okay, I'm not sure. So there you go. I'm not sure. I don't know. And maybe that's not very satisfying. But this is it's an open-ended discussion. Again, maybe not very satisfactory. But I think ultimately it comes back to, you know, this idealized version of masculinity is a response. It's a response to being aware that there are a lot of expressions of masculinity out there that we don't like. You know, we other people are highly critical of certain aspects and expressions of masculinity that are damaging to others, that are damaging to men themselves, that do not reflect consideration or care or thoughtfulness or personal responsibility, that reflect something that's stuck, reflect something that's unchanging, reflect something that's unchallenged. And that can only end, one way. It can only end with further further diminishment of masculinity, and further criticism of masculinity, and a further loss of faith in masculinity. So I have the naive belief that having a conversation like this, or putting out a monologue like this, contributes something that is of use, that is in some way positive, that is in some way hopeful. And if I put it out there as a task, I think my fundamental position, or my fundamental piece of advocacy, is to regard men as far more complex and far more deserving of your thought than some symptoms of masculinity, some symptoms of negative or damaged masculinity would otherwise suggest, is worthwhile. So I would come back to a position of extend your care and consideration to the men that you know. try and appreciate and value them in, you know, in ways that are more thoughtful, and more considerate. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to want. And certainly, you know, certainly that's how I would try to view everyone. I think try to step away from your assumptions and go, you know, what is going on with this person, regardless of their gender or, you know, sexual orientation or gender identity, or age or ability or skin color or, you know, nationality, religion, etc. Step away from your assumptions and go, what's going on with this person? And then beyond that, it's, you know, then it becomes completely personal and completely subjective and completely contextual. What's the opportunity for exchange here? How far can this go? What moment is available to us? And, you know, I think maybe that's not a bad place. That's not a bad place to conclude. What moment is available to us? I mean, this is a moment. This is a moment in time, a moment in history. Depending on where you live, it's a moment in geography. It's a moment in economy. It's a moment in politics. It's a moment in culture. And as I've said, all of these things impact, affect, colour, shade masculinity. They all inform masculinity. And they inform femininity as well. They inform, you know, whatever else, whatever other iterations of human identity are out there. They're all subject to the moment, the immediate moment and the larger moment. We're all subject to these things at all time. And this series on masculinity is a response, has been a response to the moment. And yeah, I don't know. Look, that's all I've got. That's all I've got. Like, I know it's been a bit meandery today. I accept that. I'm trying to just explore my own thinking on this as well as I sit here, and hope I haven't misrepresented myself and my thinking in this area. You know, it is what it is. But I hope if you have listened to this, you come away kind of going, yeah, that feels kind of right. Or, you know, reach out, let me know on you know, social media, or direct message the pod on, you know, either Facebook, or use the email, the clearoutlive@gmail.com, and say, look, you really missed some fundamental points. You know, maybe I have. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think what you're coming away with, I hope what you come away with clearly is, from me, a sense of empathy for other men, advocacy for personal responsibility, for self-discipline, for self-control, advocacy for embracing and valuing the emotional lives of men, the interior lives of men, and for viewing men with greater care and consideration, with greater thought, with, I don't know, I mean, I was going to use the word sympathy, because I think it's I don't think it's easy being male. I think there's a burden of expectation You know, I spoke about the burden of responsibility, but you know, I think men have there's a lot of expectations made of men, and that creates a pressure that many men feel acutely, and it's a pressure that can be very difficult to manage and can push men into certain coping mechanisms that can be very self-destructive, and I think that has to be part of this conversation as well. Yeah, so look, that's it. That's all I've got. I know it's does that feel like a bit of a damp squib to end things with? You know, what can I tell you? You know, what can I tell you that you don't already know? What can I spell out in conclusion? You know, humans are messy creatures. Men are humans. Therefore, men are messy creatures. And you could put, you know, women into that conversation as well. We are complex, messy, contradictory, confounding, infuriating animals. And we've created a lot of our own problems. But certainly there are huge and justified concerns about men out of control and damaged, destructive masculinity. And, you know, this series has definitely been, you know, my attempt to put something positive out there, to contribute to the conversation, and to maybe open one or two windows in your own thinking around men and masculinity, and of course, you know, boys, and you know anyone who's on the journey to manhood, even if that's someone who's a man already on the outside. Okay, what else? Anything else in today's episode? Go and see Masterclass. Go and see Masterclass. It's Broken Talkers production, which is absolutely connected to this topic. It is a great piece of theatre. It's on at the moment in the Project Theatre. By the time you listen to this, there will be four shows left that you could possibly attend. I think Thursday night, Friday night, maybe a Saturday matinee and an evening show in the Project Theatre in Dublin. And then there's a national tour around Ireland. Just look up Broken Talkers online and find the details. They will be back in the Dublin area. They'll be in Dunleary at the end of June for a couple of shows. And fundamentally, Masterclass, which has been received great acclaim everywhere it's gone. It's just back from an engagement in London. It's been to lots of different places in the world, and people respond really strongly to it. And it's fundamentally an exploration and deconstruction of the male expert myth, or the male expert mystique, particularly in the world of art making, theatre making. And it's it's a brilliant show, brilliantly performed by Adrian Truscott and Phelim Cannon. Really, really funny. I mean, some just great comic moments in it. But as always with Broken Talkers, some really strong, thought-provoking ideas in it as well that will challenge your complacency and challenge your own assumptions. And it's it's a very particular style of theatre, performed and delivered brilliantly, and designed to be what it is: a provocation, a slap in the face, a double grab of the lapels, and a shake of your body. And it's well worth seeing. for the performances, for the intelligence of the construction, for the strength of the ideas, and as I say, for the sort of the provocation of the arc of the show. So do go and check out Masterclass if you get a chance at all. And as I say, just look up online, Broken Talkers Masterclass. They're going around the country, 3 or 4 or 5 different venues, before coming back to the Pavilion Theatre in Dunleary at the end of the month. You'll enjoy it, and it'll get you thinking and get you talking. So, what more can you ask from a piece of art than that? Okay, thank you very much for listening. Thanks for listening to this series. If you've managed to take in all 5 parts, I'm sure there's been a bit of overlap, but not too much, I think. And I know it's been a bit foggy in places, but that's just part of my process. That's how I deal with this stuff and how I look at it. And I would really welcome any pushback. I'd really welcome anyone pointing out any big areas that you feel I didn't touch on or reflect upon. And there'd be plenty of opportunities to have further discussions in this area. Okay, that's it. I'm gone. Have a great week. Stay cool. Mind yourselves. I'll be back soon. All the best. Bye.